But again, thank you all for joining us. And let me introduce Sarah Rizzolo, one of our family law section chairs.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I am going to introduce Nate Bailey, who is our family law wizard representative, and he is in charge of legal education. And a special thank you to Nate and our family wizard for being our event sponsor today.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank everyone for allowing our family wizard to be a part of this event and continue working with the Boulder County Bar. And I just wanted to mention our brand new feature, which is calls. It's something that a lot of people have been asking about for years, and we're so happy to finally have it available to all parents that are utilizing our family wizard to make voice and video calls, to do things like virtual parenting time, and keep up to date with their co-parenting activities. Any parent who is receiving the fee waiver on our family wizard will qualify for a free account, which does grant them access to all of the features, including calls. It's very easy for clients to qualify for that free fee waiver. So if you're working with any low-income clients, anyone who needs financial assistance, please do not hesitate to take advantage of that resource, which is available from our website, or you can always reach out to me for a copy of that form. But I don't want to take any more of your time today, so I will go ahead and pass it to Brittany Frisbee.
Thank you, Nate. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brittany Frisbee. I'm a co-chair of the family law section for the BCBA alongside with Sarah. Today we have Christy Stewart joining us. She is the legal services coordinator for Safe Shelter of St. Vrain Valley. She advocates for survivors who are navigating the legal system and accompanies them to divorce, custody, criminal and protection order hearings. She and her team focus on supporting survivors throughout their court cases and in helping them navigate the legal issues that surround the ending of an abusive relationship. Her team works with attorneys, law enforcement, caseworkers, and various other professionals to assist survivors of domestic abuse. Drawing on their personal and professional experiences, her team provides empathetic support and understanding to clients who are often very overwhelmed and very frustrated by the proceedings. So with that, Christy, thank you. We'll let you take it away on how we can practice more trauma-informed.
Thank you so much, Brittany. I am really excited to be here. This is something that I'm very passionate about. And once I figure out how to share my screen, we will be ready to go. So again, like Brittany said, my name is Christy. I work at Safe Shelter. We really focus on walking with clients through the divorce and custody process, and in addition to the other things. On a personal level, I got divorced 8 years ago. I have 5 children with my ex-husband, 5 children. I have 5 children with my ex-husband, and I was in court a lot. It was about 1.5 years in the initial divorce hearing. I represented myself with the help of a family friend who's an attorney. I did my 8-hour final orders hearing by myself against my ex and his attorney. And then once that was over, after a while, I decided to move to Colorado from California. We initiated a move away hearing, which included what's the equivalent to a PRE out in Colorado. And each of these 1.5 year blocks included many, many motions in between, many, many smaller hearings. It wasn't just like 1 or 2, the temporary and then the final. It was all kinds of motions and hearings in between. And then once I got out here to Colorado, my ex moved out too, and we went back to court for more financial stuff. So personally, I have a little bit of experience as the client. So hopefully some of that experience can kind of, I don't know, maybe help bridge some of the things that you see in court and maybe give you some different perspectives as we move forward today. So I titled this the Trauma-Informed DR Attorney, and it is going to be, because of where I work, it is going to be very domestic violence focused, because I do think that a lot of, once you get into the highly contested divorce and family custody hearings, a lot of it has a lot of abuse centric or even just toxic centric issues. And so that's what a lot of what we're going to talk about today. In fact, most of it. So I'm going to keep going. The first slide that I have here is talking about just defining what domestic violence is. And as we talk today, I am sorry, I'm going to minimize the, I'm going to fix it so I can see what I need to see. So what we're going to talk about today is not so much domestic violence in the physical realm, the battering and the physical aspect of domestic violence, but more about the non-physical forms, the more coercive and covert and insidious forms, because once an abuser gets to family law and family court, they most of the time, they understand that they shouldn't be physical at this point with the kids or their ex or their soon-to-be ex. So we're going to talk more about the covert forms, and it's a pattern. So domestic violence is a pattern of behaviors used by one partner to maintain power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship. And it's really important to acknowledge that this is a pattern, that it is the motivation. The motivation behind it is to maintain power and control from one party over the other party. And it's not always physical. In fact, a lot of studies have shown that the same effects on the brain occur whether it's physical domestic violence or whether it's psychological and emotional. So the covert aspects of domestic violence are still very, very powerful and very, very damaging. To start off with, your DV 101, this is the power and control wheel. I assume that many of you have seen this. There are a lot of different versions. This is the Duluth model, which is, I think, the original wheel that was presented. Now they have a teen violence wheel, they have a equality wheel, they even have a post-separation abuse wheel, which you may have seen. And if you haven't, that might be helpful to look at. This wheel talks about all the different aspects of domestic violence, all the different ways that an abuser will try to maintain power and control. This wheel is gendered. I'm going to try really hard during this presentation to keep it as neutral as I can. I might slip up, but I think it's important because it's not always gendered. It is a lot. So I'm going to try to keep it neutral, but I'm just going to run through these spokes on this wheel really quick, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. An abuser might use intimidation. They might use emotional abuse. They might use isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming. They might use the children. Very often there are threats of, I'm going to get 100% custody. I'm going to report you to CPS because you're abusing the children. I'm going to get the children taken away from you. That is so common, and you've probably all heard it too. They may use male privilege. They may use economic abuse, and they might use coercion and threats. And these all combined, they can escalate to physical violence, but if they don't, they're still very, very damaging, and they're still very, very difficult to recover from. But I'm going to give you an example of isolation. Isolation, also something to note, is these aren't always really obvious to the victim or to other people. Using isolation, let's say there's a book club once a month. One party wants to go to book club. The other party says, yeah, you should absolutely go to book club. I just need you home by 9 because I have to work tomorrow early. And once I put the kids to bed, if they wake up past 9 and I have to get up with them, it just doesn't work for me, and I won't have enough energy in the morning. Well, one time, that can be seen as a pretty reasonable request. If it happens every time, and if it's, you need to be home by 9, and after 9, there are phone calls and there are texts and there are harassments, and then there's punishment that night or the next day, either cold shoulder or not helping with the kids as much, or being mean and nasty. that is where it turns into abuse. So one time asking someone to be home at a certain time, not a big deal. But again and again and again, combined with these other factors, that turns into an abusive pattern. And that's what I mean by this has to be a pattern. One thing does not equivocate, does not turn into a domestic violence relationship. Another thing is using economic abuse. One party may have taken away all the credit cards and may have limited spending. And if the other party wants to go to the store and get groceries, they need to kind of present a list, and it needs to be reviewed for relevance, although not ideal. We have to look at the history. Has one party maxed out all their credit cards and gotten the family into so much debt that the other party can't keep up? Do they have a massive spending problem? Then there may be some justification. That probably wouldn't be the best way to handle it, but there may be some justification for that. However, if the whole aim is to be in control and have the power, then that's an abusive dynamic. So those are some ideas for how it works and things that you can look out for. You know, is it a pattern? What's the motivation? What's the tone? Those are ways that you can kind of start to discern different acts and whether or not your clients are in a domestic violence relationship. So we talked about the power and control wheel. Now we're going to talk a little bit about post-separation abuse. Now I'm going to be very honest and say this isn't an evidence-based graph. This is something I came up with this could have been bullet points as well. It doesn't have to be, it's not necessarily a cycle, but this is what tends to happen, and behaviors abusers resort to when they're in a post-separation. So either right at the beginning or as they're moving all the way through the divorce process, these can be cycling, these different factors. The initial thing that most abusers will start with is they're going to try to get back together. They're going to say, oh, I miss you so much. I love you so much. I really want to be together. I'll do anything. Please, let's just be together, because they want to get the victim back in their control. They want to get the victim back home or back in their life so that they can start controlling and manipulating again. They will then move to persuasion. You know, this is going to be really expensive. This is going to damage our family. It's going to be so expensive. We're going to be in so much debt if you decide that this is really what you want to do. This is going to be so hard on the kids. Have you even considered what the kids are going to be going through? It's going to be so difficult for them. It's going to destroy our family. Think about the baby. The baby's never going to know what it's like to have a mother and a father together. And if that doesn't work, hopefully the victim's gotten enough space for these two to not work. But if that doesn't work, they're going to move to bargaining. Okay, I understand it's not going to work, but we can do this without attorneys. We can do this by ourselves. We can mediate together. We can do this amicably, because the abuser wants to stay in control. The abuser knows that they still have a voice in this relationship, and they can still manipulate the other party. Sometimes you'll hear abusers suggest, well, you know, we can meet together with your dad, thinking, you know, that will give the victim might buy in with that, but the dad doesn't have any knowledge of what's legally allowable. So it still keeps the abuser in control, allowing them a certain amount of manipulation and influence. Hopefully by this point, the client has hired you or talked to you and you can help them not succumb to this. You can help them reason through it. But once the client has resisted this part, the abuser is going to go to retaliation. The abuser is going to start intimidating, going to start punishing, going to start using the kids against the victim, maybe in visitation. The abuser knows all the push points that make the victim upset. The abuser knows if the victim is super concentrated on when the kids get in bed. The abuser knows if the victim is sensitive to how the kids look when they go to school. So the abuser is going to start punishing the victim, going to start intimidating the victim. And then they're going to cycle through these maybe a few times and maybe in different orders as as the victim and then move through the divorce process. And this is super important for all of you to know because it gives you a tool to kind of start judging. Am I working with the victim? Am I maybe working with the abuser? If the abuser starts doing this and you're working with the victim, you can maybe use this to your advantage. If they're in the bargaining stage, you can see if you can get some bargaining going. It may not work, but you can kind of play to an abuser and see if you can get what you want out of this. And if by chance you're working with the abuser, you won't be caught off guard when they start acting like this. And once they do start acting like this, you can make a plan for how to manage them throughout the rest of the proceedings. So it's a really good tool. It's really good bullet points to know whether or not they're in the correct order. If you start seeing this behavior, that will give you some insight into what to do next and your next moves. I really wanted to touch on what it feels like to be a victim because, you know, as attorneys, you're all in it. You know what to expect. You know what's coming next. And sometimes victims are rough. They're emotional, they're high needs, and it can be hard to be empathetic and hard to see where they're coming from. So I felt like it was really important to show you what it feels like to be a victim and what they're going through, what they've gone through for the last 5 to 50 years, over and over and over. So they've been lied to again and again and again. They've been repeatedly shut down. Now, again, every abuser isn't the same. There are different ways that abusers come at victims. But one thing is they'll shut victims down. If the victim tries to call them on a behavior, they will react. The victim will escalate. And then when the victim's good and angry, the abuser will shut them down. I can't talk to you when you're this angry. And the victim's left with so much anger inside and they don't know where to put it. And that happens again and again and again. And the victim has just been invalidated. And then they've been criticized. They've been criticized for how they cut up the cucumbers. They've been criticized for how they drive. They've been criticized for how they park. They've been criticized for how they change the diaper. They've been criticized for how they vacuum, for everything. They often, here's an example, the abuser and the victim go to a party at the beginning of their relationship. They have a great time. They come out to the car. They get in the car and the victim's, yeah, that was a great party. And the abuser's like, you are so loud. You laugh so loud. It's really embarrassing. It's really embarrassing how loud you are at a party. I just didn't even know how to react when I heard you. And the poor victim is, I really thought we had a good time, but I guess I'm really loud. Am I really loud? So they're back in their head trying to figure out if they're really loud. So over time, the victim adjusts their behavior. Okay, I'm really loud. And the next party, they're really withdrawn and quiet. And they get in the car after that party and these are, why were you so quiet? You're so depressed. Everybody thinks you hate being with me because you're so depressed and sad. Well, I thought I was really loud, but now you're saying I'm really sad. I don't blame it on me. I don't know what you're talking about. You're really loud. Why didn't you have any fun tonight? So the victim can't win. And that's the last point, is they're subject to moving targets. You know, first they're too loud, then they're too quiet. They're not doing anything right. And this is what's in the victim's mind all day and all night, all the time they're with the abuser. They're made to believe they're incompetent in certain areas. They're blamed for anything that's wrong in the partnership. Literally anything. And if they bring a problem to the abuser, don't worry, it's twisted around to where it's their fault. So that's what a victim has been dealing with forever. And maybe you know some of that, but if you can just picture in your mind how hard it would be to do anything without being criticized or told you're wrong or told you're stupid or told you're not worth anything or told you can't do anything. You're not a good parent. You're not a good cook. You're not a good driver. You know, nothing about you is good. The abuser knows all the victim's weak spots. They push on them constantly, and especially during the divorce and custody process. They take any transparency the victim has shared during the relationship and they use it against them on a regular basis. And in each relationship, there are probably three to four things that an abuser kind of gathers as their weapon that they use over and over and over again. We joke it's the greatest hits. They pull out the greatest hits, the things, the 3 or 4 biggest things the victim has ever done wrong. Never mind that the abuser has hundreds of terrible, horrible things that they've done. These 3 or 4 things they take and they hammer them back at the victim, and the victim just can't even stand anymore. They can't even remember the things the abuser has done wrong because they've got these 4 things weighing them down so heavily. For example, at the beginning of a relationship, a victim may share, in that vulnerable, transparent time, my grandmother, I had a victim who had this. My grandmother was bipolar. My aunt is bipolar. And I shared with him how scared I was that I might someday be diagnosed bipolar. And she's like, and that's all he ever, he always accuses me of being bipolar, or he talks about how my aunt and my grandma are bipolar, and so I'm definitely going to become bipolar. It's things like that the abusers latch onto. They know what the victim's fears are, what their weaknesses are. Nobody's perfect, and they just grind it into the victim. So the victim really, once a victim comes to you, they're usually pretty low. And so they're going to be high maintenance. They're going to be insecure. They're going to need some hand holding. And hopefully just seeing this picture helps you understand a little more why a victim would be like that. And we'll talk a little more about it in the next few slides. What does it look like when you're working with a victim? And you probably all, you recognize it. You've probably all worked with at least one victim, maybe a lot. A victim may be high needs, and now you know why. They may have a constant barrage of questions. They may be super, you're getting emails all the time and texts all the time. They're probably very scared. They may ask if you believe them because they probably feel kind of crazy inside, and they probably kind of can't believe it themselves that they allowed themselves to get in this deep of a relationship with someone and allowed these things to happen. They may also not be fully aware of the extent to which they've been victimized, and that might be part of the role you play as that trauma-informed attorney. That might be part of how you guide them and help them. You might recognize more even after this presentation, or you may already have a lot of knowledge on this. If you recognize it and you call it out for them, that would really help them kind of gain a foothold. And victims, most of the time, aren't hateful. They usually don't want to be mean, and they're usually willing to take some blame. Those are very different from what an abuser will do. Now, I say this with a caveat. If you're paying attention, there's probably a lot of different kinds of victims, but in this sense, there are 2. There's a victim who left the abuser, and there's the victim who was left. And that might be because of an affair, because of an arrest, because of, the abuser just decided they didn't want to be with them anymore. And the victim who was left is going to present probably differently than the victim who did the leaving, because the victim who did the leaving had some time to assess what was happening in their relationship. They had some time to assess, to let go. They had some time to let go of the abuser and decide, make the decision for themselves. And the abuser the victim who the abuser left them didn't have that. So they're going to be a lot more shell-shocked. They're probably going to present much more sad, much more missing the abuser than the victim who did the leaving. And the victim who did the leaving might be a little more hateful, might be a little more mean. But the thing is, they'll usually be more willing to speak angrily and meanly, but they won't really want to take the abuser out, take the abuser for everything they've got. And as the attorney, you're in a position to begin building this victim up by believing them, by guiding them towards healthy engagement, by validating and educating them and giving them choices. You're helping them heal, even though that's not even your job. And we'll talk a little more about those things too. So this is really important. I actually did a survey of some victims, and one of them said that it would be really good if attorneys understood what DARVO was, and some of you might recognize this term. It's a reaction abusers may have to being held accountable for their behavior. This reaction will happen in court. It will happen with attorneys. It will happen in front of a judge. It will happen with the client, the victim, just one-on-one. It has happened one-on-one throughout their whole relationship. It could definitely happen now throughout the divorce too. So when the abuser is confronted, they will deny whatever the accusation is. They will attack the person doing the accusing, and then they will reverse the role of victim and offender so that if it's one-on-one, it will be the victim is actually the one that's wrong. If it's in a court, it will be the victim who's the one that's wrong, or it will be some other party like the counselor or the dentist because it was an issue around the dentist's office. It will be something else, but it will never be the abuser who was wrong, even if they're caught in an outright lie. That lie was not their fault. It was somebody else's, usually the victim's, sometimes another party. So that looks like, I have a little kind of situation that I'm going to talk about. It is a man and a wife. Did you go surfing this morning? This is the wife. Did you go surfing this morning? No, I didn't go surfing this morning. Why would you say that? So there's the denial. No, I didn't go surfing. Well, I saw Mike at pickup and he said you had a good surf session together this morning, but I thought you were working. So what if I was surfing? I never get to do anything fun. Why are you always keeping tabs on me? Why do you want me to work all the time? You're so controlling. So there's the attack. I got caught surfing. I got caught lying, but I'm still not gonna admit it. It's not the fact that I lied. It's the fact that the victim is attacking me right now. So I'm gonna attack back. I can't believe you're keeping tabs on me all the time. Well, I don't keep tabs on you all the time. We just agreed that you'd be working this morning, and that's where you told me you were. I never told you I was working. You're putting words in my mouth. You're always doing that. You don't believe me, and you're always harassing me about work. I'm not harassing you. I do believe you. You're too angry right now. I can't talk to you when you're like this. So there, all of a sudden, the roles are reversed. Instead of taking accountability for their behavior, for lying, instead of even addressing the original question, the abuser goes straight into attacking and reversing so that the victim is put on the defense by how they're reacting. And that pattern may also help you identify abusers. So if your clients are doing this, denying, attacking, and reversing the roles, they may be the abuser. And if the other party is doing this, then your client is probably the victim. And the result of this whole thing is the conversation is no longer focused on the abuser or their lie. The victim is left confused and on the defense. The victim has been shut down once again. And the victim questions the reasons of bringing it up in the first place. Should I have even brought it up? I mean, it didn't matter. And now I'm defensive and angry. So it's a very well-used tool. And it's really important to remember that if it's a victim and they're confronted, they're not going to do the same thing. They may deny something, especially if it's not true, but they're not usually going to go on to attack the other party. They may deny it and then be more explanatory, like, I didn't do that because blah, 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 blah. Or they may deny it. They may be found to be guilty and then they'll be like, yeah, I did it because blah, 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 blah. Knowing DARVO can be a great tool for the attorneys. It helps you recognize the abuser. And again, once you recognize that if your client is the abuser, then you have tools and you can use this knowledge to guide the abuser. You'll know who you're dealing with. You can educate the abuser to be more decent. And honestly, here's something that many abusers are fairly good at following rules if you lay them out, because they're not really sure how the world works outside of their controlling brain. And if they're thrust into a family court environment, you can test this. Some of them are fairly good at, if you tell them what to do, they're going to do their best to do it. They may not do it great, but they might be good at listening to authority because their brain works in an authority structure, and they might look at you as the authority. So if you're the authority and you're the one who has the control, they're looking to you for what to do next. So you can kind of guide them, help them kind of tone down the behavior, and honestly get the best results for them and the other party just by kind of using your authority and your power that they perceive to help them not be so out of control. Help them understand why they're doing what they're doing. It might work. It's worth a try. And I have seen it work. Yeah. So here's the differences, some of the differences between a victim and an abuser. This was a hard one to do because it's not always super duper clear. Sometimes victims do things that I might attribute to an abuser, and vice versa. But almost universally, victims will self-reflect. If you're dealing with a victim, you'll hear them say, was it me? Maybe I did provoke. Maybe I did say too much. Maybe I'm the problem. And they'll often take the blame and they'll say, I did contribute. I hear this a lot when the other party was arrested. Well, I did, I do sometimes, respond when they provoke me. I do sometimes get angry back. They'll often admit to that and say, maybe I'm part of the problem. And this part, they often have evidence and they can usually stick to facts. They also have a lot of extra things happening, but when it comes down to it and they need to stick to the facts, they can, and they can usually present evidence. For example, someone I was dealing with, they had this agreement with their partner that the abuser, would pay the rent and the victim would pay, the agreed upon everything else. And they didn't make a lot of money, so it wasn't a huge undertaking. It kind of evened out. The victim maybe was paying a little bit less, but the abuser was understood to be the primary provider. So they had this agreement and they had a little handwritten contract that that's what they were going to do. Well, turns out that over the course of a year, the abuser only paid the rent 2 times. And you might wonder, how the heck did the victim not realize that? Well, the landlord was well off. The landlord traveled, didn't check that account very often. So the landlord was off traveling, came back, checked the account, sent an email to both of them. Hey, here's the last 12 months and here's the month's rent was paid. Well, the victim finds out, what the hell? And can provide evidence. Here's the email from the landlord. Here's the contract that we signed. So they have the evidence and they can stick to the facts, right? Abusers on the other side will make a lot of claims that sound fairly factual. And a lot of the time they're used to not being fact checked, but they don't have any evidence. They make claims like she has borderline personality disorder or bipolar personality disorder. And here is the list of the things that I have to prove it. And it's things that the abuser wrote down, incidents that the abuser recorded that never happened, that they don't have any evidence for usually, or that they twist it around in such a way to make it totally incorrect. And they don't usually have actual evidence. They might have this list that they created. They may say, yeah, I've got evidence for this. Yeah, I've got that on tape. But they can't provide the actual evidence. They're relying on nobody asking them. And sometimes that happens in court. Sometimes it doesn't. And usually attorneys know what, you all know what to focus on and what needs to have the evidence and what doesn't. But that will often get a victim riled up. He's claiming that, and that's not true. There's no evidence. And other things the abuser will do is they will almost never take responsibility. They will almost never say, maybe it was me. So that's almost, you can almost take that to the bank. They don't self-reflect. They don't self-identify. They don't. They do try to compare and justify. So if you take our last example of the rent, in that agreement, the abuser had decided that the victim also needed to set as part of everything else was setting aside their gas money. And so, well, in this argument about the rent, well, you haven't ever set aside any gas money. Why would I set aside gas money for you? I know you're not actually going to work. Why would I do that? Well, I'm supposed to pay the rent and you're supposed to pay my gas money, but that's not equivalent. They don't equal the same thing. And so the abuser will try to compare and justify things that don't match up. Abusers are pretty good at sounding contrite, but they're really good at sounding contrite and still not taking responsibility. They're really good at saying, yeah, that happened, but that's what the counselor told me to do. That's because the doctor told me X, Y, and Z. It's never them that made the choice. It's always someone else who pushed them to it. And like in the first little graph we looked at with the arrows, they don't want to bring in a third party. They don't want the school counselor to know. They don't want the teacher to know. They don't want people CC'd in emails. They want to keep the interaction between themselves and the victim so that later they can say an untrue, they can misrepresent what actually happened so that they can keep control of the victim and they can probably keep control of the situation. So the more you can help your victim CC that teacher, CC the doctor, CC the reception staff, the more that will kind of help keep the abuser in line, because they're not going to usually go off and be inappropriate when there's someone else watching the interaction. In addition to that, with counselors, often if you can get them all to CC the counselor, that can help move things forward that have been stymied. They don't like third parties watching. They want to look really good to third parties. And now that you have a pretty good understanding of what domestic violence looks like, hopefully some of that was new information for you. We're just going to look at, what is trauma informed? And honestly, a lot of what we just did is a lot of more trauma informing. But here's a little bit more of of some principles to go by. This is from the CDC website. It's 6 guiding principles, and we'll just go through each principle. Some of them attorneys can be really involved in, and some of them you can just encourage your client to get that, and we'll go through that. So for safety, most of the time, safety we think of right at the beginning when there's an incident, and that would be law enforcement. Court might come into it with different arrests or protection orders, and then a community organization like Safe Shelter, where we're providing a safe place for someone to go. But as the attorney, you can help the client as you're making decisions on what needs to happen in their case. Is this decision going to be safe for you? Are there going to be repercussions outside of court? If we're going to file a separation agreement and have the other party served, are we going to do that when the kids are with you or with them? Are we going to do that maybe when you're out of town visiting family with the kids, because the other party might escalate? So those are ways that you do think about your client's safety. The next principle is trustworthiness and transparency. Do you understand the dynamics of DV? And if you didn't before, you do now. Can you speak knowledgeably about what's happening to the client? Do you know how to empathize? And hopefully a lot of the things that I showed you earlier just about what the victim has been through will help you to be able to empathize. Can you model a healthy relationship? So granted, you and the client are not in a romantic relationship, but any sort of relationship that a client sees, the more you can model that for them, the more they can move forward seeing, oh, this is how people are honest. This is how people treat me like a human being. This is what it looks like. That's an opportunity that you have to be in their life, someone who gives them a chance, someone who gives them a voice, someone who hears them and listens to what they're saying. And if you can get some buy-in from them, instead of just saying, I'm the attorney and I know best, if you can explain why you think the decisions are the best decisions for them, and they have a chance to agree and say, okay, yeah, I agree too. Instead of just saying, I'm the attorney, this is what we're going to do, which I'm sure none of you do. You would never do that. But that's another way to build transparency and trustworthiness. And then peer support is the third principle, and they're mostly going to get this from support groups, from family and friends. But as the attorney, you can encourage them to get this support and to maybe move to therapy. You know, you can be that voice that says, hey, this is a time, you know, this divorce, this custody matter could go on for quite some time. If you're getting therapy in the middle, you're going to be able to grow as you move through it. And that's a voice that you can be for them. And I don't know, I hope that as attorneys, you realize a lot of the time clients are looking up to you. You have the knowledge that they don't right now. You're going to get them through this situation. And if they didn't have you, they'd be floundering, and they really look up to you. And if you can, and you have, so because of that, you have a voice and an influence over them that you can use for good, or you can use for bad. And you can use that to help them heal in some ways that they may not get if they had a different attorney. So you can encourage them to go to therapy, counseling. You can give them resources. If they can't afford counseling, Safe Shelter in Longmont we do have counseling and stuff like that, and it's at no charge. The next principle is collaboration and mutuality. Do you listen to them? Do you listen to the client? Do you know how to set appropriate boundaries? You want to make sure they feel heard and they're involved, but you're also the advisor and the advocate, and that's kind of a balance. But the more you're showing appropriate boundaries, the better it is for them. And the more you're modeling this, the more they're going to see what's healthy, what's a good way to move forward from all of this mess that I'm in. You're the professional and you provide expertise, but you don't want to overrun them or dismiss them. So these are all balances that you can walk. You want to respect your client by creating realistic expectations and not promising more than you can deliver. And I think that goes whether you're representing the abuser or the victim. You know, you can help everybody by saying, I'm not going to be able to get you that, because often abusers, they're going to come in, they're going to tell you what they want, they're going to tell you when they want it, and they're going to tell you how they want you to do it. And if you can say, look, this is what's realistic, this is what I think I can get you, take it or leave it, you know, that will help them kind of chill out a little bit, I hope. And then I think it's really important for attorneys to review what a win looks like. And I think you all know, you've had a disappointed client. You've seen, you know, you've done all this great work and you got this amazing ruling, and your client's upset and sad and disappointed, and they're talking to their mom and their dad and they're all crying and it's terrible. You know, if you can review ahead of time what that win may look like. And something that I've found in working with victims, and myself included, it almost doesn't matter what happens. It's not going to feel like a win. Even if they get a really good result, even if even if the abuser gets 2 hours of supervised visitation every 2 weeks, that still often just feels horrible, because the victim has seen how harmful the abuser can be for their children. And sometimes a victim just needs to know that it may not feel like a win. And that's a really good way you can validate them, but also say, look, I know this may not feel like a win, but believe me when I tell you, this is honestly one of the best things that could have happened. If you can acknowledge their sadness and their pain, but then also move forward to say, this was really what we wanted. That will go a long way in building trust and building that mutuality that we're looking for. And again, helping the victim move forward in a healthy way. The next principle is empowerment, voice, and choice. It's got a few slides, so buckle down. And some of these might be repetitive, but articulating their options and reviewing the pros and cons rather than telling them this is the way these things go, which we've already talked about. Also advocating for the client to take time for personal growth while this case goes on, and maybe on and on and on, so that your client came into you kind of probably this puddle, this mess, really looking to you for everything. And then over the course of this hearing, you're working to show them and model what it looks like to be healthy and what it looks like to respond to their abuser. And then hopefully by the end, if they're doing this personal growth, they're in a place to move forward, and then they're in a place to make the final decisions when they're not still suffering from just immense trauma. You want to also make sure their client understands the actual rights and options. This is really important because, as you've all probably seen, abusers just get in there. They are really good at threatening and scaring the client, and you're getting calls at all hours, but they said they were going to do this and they said they were going to do that. If you can be proactive and kind of let your client know they can't do that, these are things they can't do, then the client will feel a lot more empowered. So, abusers will often say, you can't do that without my permission. I'm going to take the kids and go into hiding. You're not going to get any money from me. I'll get full custody. No one will ever believe you. Divorce will destroy our kids and our family and our finances. All these things that they throw out there, and they're freaking the victim out. If you can get in there and help them understand what their actual rights and options are, a lot of the power of the abuser will be taken away, and the victim will become more in charge of themselves. Other things you can do: shelter them from the accusations, manipulations and threats from the other side. Filter and only relay things that actually need to be addressed. And I don't know how you practice, but I do know a lot of attorneys that just forward everything to their clients. And maybe there's a really good reason that you do that. And maybe that's how you want to keep practicing. But I would really encourage you to think it through. If that's something that you do, think about how you can shelter your client from a lot of this trauma. Every time they get an email from their abuser, every time they see the new pleadings that are just usually full of lies and vitriol and just hate, that destroys them. There were times when I received the pleadings or the response, and I just thought, I just can't keep going on. I was accused of so many things that were unsubstantiated, and your victim is just already down. And so if there's a way for you to filter what's important and what needs to be addressed on their behalf, that will go a long way to protecting them and their healing, because everything the abuser says is powerful and legitimate. So we may see what the abuser said and just laugh because it's all garbage. It's not even going to be considered in court. But the victim is so scared and has been so scared and is so afraid of the consequences of losing the kids or the money or whatever, that anything the abuser says feels really powerful. So if you can consider sheltering your client from that, especially at the beginning, I think that would be a really, really nice service you'd be offering them. And then on the other side of that is modeling how to respond to the abuser. The client's going to respond to every single thing, and they're going to get their OFW messages, and they're going to get their texts, and it's going to be, you know, a client sent me probably 5 pages of screenshots from their abuser, and it was just on and on and on about all the things. And the client's a mess, a complete mess, and she doesn't know what to do and how to respond. And invariably in that position, clients end up responding to everything, and they feel like they have to prove every point that's wrong. And it's really helpful if you and I try to do this too for the client, filter out like what really matters. Okay, you sent me 4 pages of junk. All I need to say is, okay, I'll meet you at the exchange at 9 a.m. That's it. That's all I need to respond. But it's really hard for a client. So the more you can model what to do and how to respond, and maybe give the client some guidelines, I'll often say, you know, make a generic response. And then if they keep coming back at you, just keep responding with that. And, you know, make a little joke, like I said at the beginning, they're using their greatest hits. They're trying to rile you up. Try not to engage, just respond with, I'll meet you at the exchange at 9 a.m. Thanks for your input. I'll meet you at the exchange at 9 a.m. And that way they're learning from you how to filter out that stuff too. Again, in this slide, if the client is in a healthy place, it might be important for them to take this stand. Don't do it if the client's not in a healthy place, but you all know that. You know when a client is going to be better capable on the stand than others. It could be really important for them and in their journey to be able to tell their story. You can give them that option. Even if they don't win the whole thing, they got to use their voice, and that's one step to healing. But you know which client not to put on the stand. Remind the client that in the legal system, their voice matters. Again, they have been shut down. They have been raked over the coals, and what they have said has not mattered at all for years, probably. So remind them that here, they may not win, they may not get everything they want, the judge may not rule in their favor, but their voice matters, their perspective matters. And that's really important to help them remember. And they're learning to trust themselves, their voice, and another person. At first, they may trust their abuser over you in the beginning. They may come to you, but they said they were going to do this and this. Hey, remember, they're not in charge anymore. Remember what I told you, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We can still do that even though they said we can't. They're not in charge. I see that I'm almost out of time and I have more slides. I'll try to go really fast. The last principle is the cultural, historical, and gender identity issues. It's important to be really sensitive. I will send with Kyle when he sends out the slides for this. I'll send a link to a game that's really good. It's called Play Spent. And, you know, in this vein, one of the things is about your finances, your financial situation. You are much of the time going to be more wealthy, especially than the clients that I have. But even then, it's, you know, them missing a day of work or a half day of work might be huge. They may not get PTO. They may not have holidays. So you know, the court having to reschedule, all of that can be a huge factor. They may have to adjust so many kids' schedules to get to court in the first place and then to have everything change. Really keeping that in mind, that their income may be a lot different than yours is important. And so this game, Play Spent, it's kind of fun. You and your staff might want to do it all together. You might just want to send it out to your staff. It's just a game that you're making choices and doing things, and your goal is to get through a whole month with enough money. I've only made it to day 26, but by myself, I've only made it to day 10. But it's a good one to just help you understand or remind you what it feels like to not have a lot of money. It's also just important to recognize your own privilege. It's important for me to recognize my own privilege. You understand the legal world. It's familiar. It's comfortable. Your client may not be familiar. Most likely they won't be. You will have the power So again, it's important to be sensitive that you have the power in this relationship. And that's why all of the things that have come before in this presentation are so important for you to keep in mind so that you don't take that power and use it to just re-traumatize the victim. Gender issues or culturally, be aware and be thoughtful about documents and materials in Spanish and English. I know the courts can't do this or don't do this, but we have a copy of the protection order paperwork in Spanish. I don't know how possible that is it's a lot of a bigger format to do that for all of the family court documents, but being aware that they're not all in Spanish and English, that's enough. Having interpreter options available, even though we have a bilingual staff, we also all have Google Translate. We also have a translating service an interpreter service on our phones so that anybody can help someone who speaks Spanish if it's necessary. And then being extra patient, our bilingual advocate, she let me know that a lot of the time people in, especially Mexico, they just don't get divorced because it's so complicated and difficult. So they may not understand at all what's happening here. So being extra patient and helping guide them through that process. And then gender identity, being really aware of the gender and sexuality language across cultures. In English, we have the they pronoun that's really, that we can use, but Spanish doesn't. So even thinking, how does a Spanish speaker or someone with a Spanish background want to be addressed and how they prefer to be addressed is something to think about. And then something really important, especially when it comes to custody, is being aware of how you present the children's, especially if there's a trans child, their names on the documents, how they want them presented, how they want their pronouns to be presented. It's really important to check in and see how they want that to happen. And there are ways for you to include what's necessary on those documents. And then also making double sure in that case, if there is a trans child and they may or may not have a parent who is trans or homophobic, they may not want to be acknowledged on the documents. So it might not be safe. So really taking time, especially when you have a child who is trans or gay, to really check in with the parent and the child, if you need to, the parent who is sensitive to that, and see how they want it. I'm at, I think, 1 o'clock. This is my almost last slide. I don't know. Brittany or Sarah, should I finish or how would you like me to go?
Christy, this is Kyle. I'd say just finish up. Anyone who
Okay.
can stay is welcome to. And again, the full recording will be available. So if you need to go, I'll send you that link later this week, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to finish up really quick. And I am pretty sure that all of you here do not ever ask any of these questions, but I felt like I should put them on here just in case you needed a little reminder. These are questions we don't ask victims. I don't have time to answer them all right now, but if you have any questions, you can definitely email me. I'd happily answer any of these questions. If you're not sure why you wouldn't ask that question, or, with no judgment or anything, I can understand why someone would ask all of these questions. But these are not questions that you want to ask a victim, especially when they're in the middle of a terribly traumatic divorce or criminal matter or anything like that. Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you leave earlier? Well, if it was so bad, why did you have so many kids with them? And hopefully after this presentation, if you had any questions before, hopefully those were answered, why you wouldn't ask this. I mean, it doesn't really sound like it was that bad. And I can't believe you didn't see that red flag. How could you possibly still have feelings for them? And that comes into play especially when the victim has been left and they're still working through all of the sadness and the separation. How can you not have any idea of your financial situation, which we reviewed how a person might not have any idea. So those are all I'm going faster now, but those are all questions that I hope you wouldn't ask. And if we had more time, I'd ask for your suggestions on any others. And then this one's blank. How can attorneys and advocates work together? Because I had someone say they can't. And I was like, but I really feel like we can. And I think I gave some examples. I personally maybe really enjoy isn't the right word, but I personally like the opportunity to kind of learn the way an attorney is maybe going, the direction the attorney wants to go, and then kind of be there to guide the client on, how to respond to their abuser, or how, be that filter so that the attorney doesn't have to get 6,000 phone calls, 6,000 emails, being that in their place and then working with the client. I feel like that could be a really good way to work together. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that we at Safe Shelter do have contract attorneys, and we would love it if any of you wanted to be work with us in that way. And full disclosure, we don't have a lot of money, so we don't use contract attorneys that much, but we're trying to build up that part of our program. And just working together and getting to know you, I enjoy talking with attorneys and hearing their points of view, especially about all of this. So I feel like we could work together that way. If you have, again, I was going to open it to other ideas, but I don't think we have time. And then the last slide is just my contact information. I'd love feedback on this. I'd love to hear from you. If you have clients that you think could benefit from our services, that just need someone to talk to, that just need, like I said, we do have counseling. We have counseling for kids and parents. We're happy to work with you. We'd really like to. And if you have just questions for me or you want to chat, here I am.
Thank you so much, Christy. This was quite informative, and a lot of things we already probably knew, but went into a lot more depth and detail. And I wrote a lot of it down just to try to remember it. So thank you. That just helps
Sure.
me. If I was looking down, taking notes. That's why, but great presentation. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Like I said, I really like doing this.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure thing.
And as I said, I will get the recording out to everybody along with the presentation materials. If you have any questions, feel free to send them my way or send them directly to Christy, and we'll make sure those get answered. So thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Christy, for joining us. Thank you to Nathan Bailey for sponsoring today, our family wizard.
Yeah, thanks, Nate.
Have a good day. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.